This isn't reality. This is fantasy. You wanted adventure? How's this? The old adrenaline going? Huh? Good boy. Now get in the closet.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City. And now, somewhere along the Alpha Quadrant, her name is Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
I hope everyone had a fantastic July 4th. We are actually recording this on July 4th. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate than to talk about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
I see no connection to the national holiday other than I have a little extra time on my hands.
Yeah.
So I now am at a point where I can rank the Trek movies.
Okay.
And this is number 3. Basically.
It is number 3. Where is it on your ranking?
I actually think it goes 1, 2, 3.
Really?
Like in the order. I know that's how rankings work, but Motion Picture, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock.
Those are your rankings.
In that order.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So far.
You're bucking the trend. For decades, I think this sort of ended around the Next Generation era, but for decades, it was always said that the odd numbers were always the bad movies. That includes the motion picture. And the even numbers were the good ones. And by the way, I don't think it's a coincidence that Nicholas Meyer had something to do with all 3 of the even numbered movies. I just think the man gets Star Trek, regardless of whether he was a fan growing up or not. But
I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, I don't think whoever directed this 3rd movie doesn't know Star Trek.
Well,
I mean, yeah, I just realized what happened after I said that.
I mean, yeah.
Leonard Nimoy directed this movie. And if anyone, he would know Star Trek. I did happen to read an article by the Hollywood Reporter that came out when his documentary came out. Mm-hmm. Biopic, I guess.
The I Am Spock biopic,
I think
whatever?
so. And it had said something that he had been able to go under budget for this film. He had been pretty intentional about penny pinching, and you can tell.
Well, think about, so the first movie was made for an ungodly amount of money in those days, and the second movie was made for significantly less. And that's because they got Harve Bennett to come in and produce it. Harve had basically been working in television for a long time. So he was used to bringing things in cheaply. Star Trek II was actually less expensive than Star Trek III. But you wouldn't know it because of the way that Nick Meyer kept everything on the bridge of one of the 2 ships. He made it a submarine movie. He made it intimate. It didn't require a whole lot of elaborate sets. It didn't require a planet to explode. It did require a spaceship to explode that then became a planet, but it didn't require the death of Genesis and like really cheapy sets that probably weren't cheap at all, but looked cheap on camera. Mm-hmm. And I think my problem with Star Trek III, it's not the story, although I'm not particularly engaged in the story. It's not the characters. I just think it looks cheap on every possible level.
It felt to me like I was just watching, and this isn't a bad thing. I felt like I was watching a sci-fi episode of a show on TV in like the 80s or 90s.
It feels to me very much like a season 1 episode of Next Gen.
And that's not a bad thing. In fact, I remember the bar scene. We're jumping quite a bit ahead into the story, but McCoy goes into a bar
with all the aliens,
and that alien is I guess he's trying to. Well, now I have to really get into the story, but McCoy / Spock is trying to get a ship out of there. And you kind of have like a smuggler type alien helping him. Anyhow, it took me out of the story because I just kept looking at this, at these, the set, at the just the atmosphere of the scene, and it felt just out of place.
Well, partially they tried to make it look more Star Wars in that moment, but it doesn't work as well in a Star Trek context, at least not in this particular Star Trek context. I mean, honestly, this movie does a lot of things for me in the same way that Star Trek II was where I fell in love with military uniforms. Star Trek 3 is really the beginning of like where I started to really dislike 23rd century casual wear. Because no one is particularly dressed.
Oh, that's the other thing that was different about this. They were in street clothes.
They're all in street
quite
clothes.
A bit. And I kind of enjoyed that. By the way,
except for poor Chekhov, who's wearing like
that was weird.
Little Lord Fauntleroy costume.
He just needed like one of those giant lollipops.
Yeah.
The alien that asks McCoy some questions, one of them being "How soon is now?" prompted me to go look up the origin of the Smiths song "How Soon Is Now," which is on the album "How Soon Is Now." And I am not the only one who wondered if Morrissey was a fan of Trek, because that album came out the year after this film came out. And there's a whole bunch of Reddit threads pondering this question. But as it turns out, that line is actually from a novel that Morrissey claimed to have, or an author, a set of books or something that he had been a fan of. So no connection there, and no point of this little factoid other than, I mean, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
I'm trying to channel Frakes. It didn't happen.
But not this time.
Not here. Not this time.
We made it up. Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, I think part of the problem too is that Harve Bennett wrote the script, whereas in Star Trek II, it was sort of started by Bennett, and Bennett hired writers, but like the person who really came in and punched it up and gave it a significant amount of weight, I think, was Nicholas Meyer, and he's not there for the third movie, and Bennett writes it on his own. By the way, do you know, just a little bit of backstory on the making of this movie? Just take a wild guess as to how long the second movie had been out by the time Paramount was like, yeah, it's time to greenlight a third movie.
So how much time between both movies?
No, yeah, between the time that say Star Trek II comes out, you know how like the studios always go, let's wait and see what the box office is like,
sure,
and that helps dictate whether there will be another movie. But how long was the second movie out in theaters before Paramount decided now is the time to greenlight a third movie, get started?
I don't know, like a month?
The next day.
Okay, so you're gonna be helpful here. It's really actually quite a relief to not be the expert of the thing we're talking about, because I get to ask you questions and not have to do a ton of research.
I mean, I'm no John Champion or anything.
I know you know your stuff. So look, at the end of Wrath of Khan, Spock essentially does a mind meld with McCoy.
Not essentially does.
He does, before he sacrifices himself for the entire crew of the ship.
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure what the motivation is around that, but in the third movie, it becomes incredibly clear. The whole premise is about this.
Yeah, the major plot point is that.
So was that all planned?
It depends on who you talk to. So Nick Meyer and even Bennett, I believe Nimoy even said that basically the idea was that if we want to leave it open, we're going to give it a little something that creates a hook so that this is something that we could potentially do later. But there was no intention to make a third movie right away. And it's not like they were in the middle of production thinking, oh, this movie's going to do gangbusters. We should automatically just start assuming there's going to be a franchise. In fact, if you listen to George Takei, he has a funny, or at least used to, I don't know if he still does the convention circuit and tells the story, but like the idea was that the motion picture was going to be the only movie. That's why it was called The Motion Picture. And then Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, saw the death of Spock, and you can't have Star Trek without Spock. So that was believed to be the last one. But then already it was clear that was going to be a juggernaut and a huge commercial and critical success as compared to the first movie. And so they immediately said, okay, well then we got to go find Spock. If we can't have Star Trek without Spock, we got to go find him. And then they did. But they destroyed the Enterprise. Spoiler alert. And you can't have Star Trek without the Enterprise. So this is going to be the last movie, but you can't leave them on Vulcan. They're all, and so that's sort of how story-wise, George Takei tells the story. But William Shatner swears to this day that they were already talking about it behind his back, that somehow or another Nimoy had gone in and decided he was going to direct the third movie, and here's how you're going to get me, and I'm going to mind meld with McCoy, and we're going to do this and this, and everyone else says no, that absolutely wasn't the case. There was no plot point for the third movie. It was simply, let's see what we can do. By the way, the very end of the second movie, where you see the torpedo tube on the Genesis planet, which also alludes to a third movie, was tacked on after Nicholas Meyer had basically created Picture Lock. So none of that was something that he wanted. And in fact, that ending is the reason he didn't come back for 3. He was like, no, you guys you ruined my ending. Like, I didn't want an ambiguous ending. I didn't want you to think Spock was coming back. It's such a gut punch, and it's so emotionally
It takes
impactful.
away, right. It's sort of, and I would agree with that. It's something that we confront in our generation of heroes on screen and some of these big franchises, that when there is a loss, you're not really sure how to process that, because there are lots of chances that character will be returning in some way, maybe recast, maybe come back as an alternate version, as a ghost, as a Jedi. Like there's all these.
Now you're just trying to make them Star Wars characters.
No. I mean, but I think I can understand why someone would be upset with any decision making in the final draft, the final film, that would take away from this tremendous impact.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best moment in the film, and one could argue that it's the best moment in the franchise, his sacrifice and his death in that moment with Kirk, the most touching, emotional moment that you could possibly have, and the death of one of your most important characters, and then you cheapen it by showing us the torpedo tube at the end. And it becomes especially cheap when in the third movie they just replay all of that in the beginning.
So the movie starts with clips of Spock's death, funeral, and the coffin landing on Genesis. It's such a bizarre way to open this film. Yeah, I don't quite understand.
This goes back to Bennett's history in television. So he decided to put a previously on, because the idea was to create a movie that could stand alone on its own without having seen the second one. But obviously it's a direct carryover. In fact, they're only like a week or so out from the events of Star Trek II, because they have refit the Enterprise as best they can out in space. They're on their way back to space dock. You're still seeing the effects of all of the explosive warfare between the two ships, the Enterprise and the Reliant, on the body of the ship. So it's a direct carryover into the next episode, if you will. And so Bennett said, okay, the best possible way to do this is to show you previously on.
That is not, but previously on in a movie, it can happen through exposition, can happen through dialogue. And I will say, and I know we should veer into the lane that I am the subject matter expert for, but what I did like and appreciate about this movie is that Shatner does a hell of a job portraying how Kirk would respond to losing his colleague and best friend. Like, I just really...
You're talking about in 3.
In 3, yes. So I wouldn't say it was like something that I enjoyed because it's sad, but it's something that I had an appreciation of. I thought that Shatner was really like showing a great portrayal of how Admiral Kirk would be in those moments, in those days, weeks.
Well, he's defensive of even Spock's quarters, where he's had them, sealed off. Chekhov did it himself. Nobody's allowed to go in there.
So, and that's kind of how this movie starts, is that we're all in mourning. The ship is, as you said, it's devastated. So it's flyable, but it's just torn up. And you're seeing those remnants, like you said, all the, even in on the bridge, just the aftermath of the attacks. And Kirk says, others are trying to get in that room. So what was that? Like, why? Why would other crewmen try to...
Well, I don't remember him saying that others were trying to get in the room, but he did say the whole crew is obsessed with his death.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, remember, the majority of the crew were trainees. They were all trainees under Spock. Mm-hmm. And so Spock was their commanding officer. And in fact, Spock was supposed to be captain of the Enterprise up until Admiral Kirk took over.
I wouldn't call that obsessed. Like, I would say that's very normal, reaction around grief.
Yeah, but we don't know what has happened between the funeral and now. We only know that the Genesis planet has become fully formed. David and Saavik has left the Enterprise, as has David. They are now on a new science vessel, the Grissom, hovering over the Genesis planet, and they are going down to Genesis to explore things. So it's been long enough that at least those two have been reassigned elsewhere. And
by the way, Saavik being played by a completely different person.
You weren't...
Made me really miss the nuances of Kirstie Alley as Saavik.
So let's talk about that. You're not a fan of Robin Curtis as Saavik. Is that simply because she was playing Saavik, or because she was playing the character differently?
I'm not really that sure.
She was playing her more strictly Vulcan-like, whereas I do believe Kirstie Alley plays the character better. I believe Kirstie Alley plays the character like I don't want to say confused, but I mean like
complicated. I think it's fine. And this character, like they just kind of
she's dry.
Yeah, and that made them very backgrounded. Like they just didn't really.
I don't disagree. Like, could you see this version of the character crying at the memorial?
And I don't really want
Spock?
to.
Yeah, she doesn't have the same appeal that Kirstie Alley did. But anyway, we should say that Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise make their way back to space dock. And this is interesting because this is sort of the dichotomy between old school and new school. A trainee comes to him and says, "Is there going to be a party when we get back? A hero's welcome." And Kirk is like, "Well, we do deserve one, don't we? Because we've literally given up the best of us." Yeah. Like, it's sort of said with spite in between his teeth, but it's
like what a thing to think about right now is glory.
Yeah, and he's just beaming that character.
That was weird.
Just beaming. Like, is there going to be
He might be a psychopath.
Is there going to be a welcome home? Well, but he represents he represents that character, that soldier, that law enforcer, that whatever, that person who goes out potentially seeking glory and gets assigned to the Enterprise. No, but I'm not. I think that's
well, probably going into it for different reasons than the main our main characters.
These are his heroes, and he sees himself following in their path, and they are.
And
it's a glorious path.
And again, I like how Kirk is, just really tempering and letting surface the concepts that are much more complicated than just the glory of this, just the win. Like, oh, we won? Does this feel like a win? Look around you? Does any of this feel like a celebration? This is a tragedy. This is a sacrifice. This is devastating. Yeah. And we're living through the aftermath. And I don't think that's simply through the lens of someone who's lost their friend. I think that's someone who's been through numerous so-called adventures that result in catastrophes and loss of life, and tremendous sacrifice. And it's deeper than simply like you get a parade when you get back. And I sort of like the way that Kirk responds to that, like really grounds the situation.
Yeah.
I honestly, I think this movie, because I'm not a huge fan of Admiral Kirk, but this movie, if anything, really drew me to him, because Spock isn't Spock the whole movie.
Right.
I don't have the character that I tend to be drawn to. So I'm sort of like, all right, what is it in Admiral Kirk that I can connect to and really admire?
I appreciate that. And I do also realize that you're looking at it from the view of someone who is studying their psychology, and you're not necessarily thinking about the behind the scenes. To me, as a viewer, and I was noticing it even more as we were watching it again last night, again, I think Meyer knows how to write with poetry and knows how to give these characters believable dialogue. And I think Bennett struggled. I didn't. Sure. I felt like Bennett watched Star Trek II or reread the script over and over again to try to get their voice, and then just sort of made attempts to make these moments poetic, but it wasn't coming through.
I'm going to say right now, there's no way I'm going to cry on this podcast talking about this film. But
unless we're talking about the funeral scene that we literally witnessed 4 times, or not the funeral, but the death, 4 times over the course of this movie.
So wait, put that on the top shelf for a second, because like the way top, like keep the shelf open. It's like open, and you're not closing that.
It's the most expensive top shelf.
But hold that there for a moment.
Okay.
I would say that Shatner did the best he could with what he had at the time. Because he did a hell of a job in that role. Okay.
Sure.
Returning to the top shelf. Oh, what did I put there? Serious.
Is it too tall for you?
I don't know. Too tall for you to see it?
It's the fact that it's the dialogue. I was saying that you said that you're not going to cry over the third movie unless we talk about the 4 different times they reference the death scene.
I felt somewhat, not manipulated, because that's super strong, but somehow I felt a little bit coerced in my relationship with this film. I won't give you something new to cry about. I will literally show you clips.
The greatest hits. And if it doesn't get you once, maybe it'll get you the second time.
Yeah, it just doesn't. It seems unfair. It seems cheap.
We should tell people, and I agree with you, we should tell people that, especially if you've not seen the movie in a while, the movie starts literally with a postage stamped version of the death scene, and as it gets bigger and bigger and fills our screen, it goes to color, and by the time Spock's shot off into space, we're at a full resolution film screen. But you're literally just watching a portion of the death. You're watching a portion of the funeral. You're watching the torpedo tube get shot off onto Genesis. And then you hear Spock deliver the famous space, the final frontier These are the continuing voyages of the Starship Enterprise, etc. And later, just a few minutes later, there are references made by McCoy to Kirk to those exact same words. Then a little while later, we have to go and look at the data tapes, the security camera footage to determine who Spock may have mind-melded with.
Yeah, we got to name the plot here, which is that Sarek, Spock's father,
yes,
comes to the ship, comes to the Enterprise.
Angry at Kirk for having left his son's body on the Genesis planet.
Right. And it becomes clear, we learn a little bit about Vulcan culture, which is that, which is not uncommon in our universe either, that there are many cultures in which the burial of a deceased person is incredibly important, like the process, the way in which you lay someone to rest. And unfortunately, they did it wrong. Apparently, shooting out your friend out into space and having it land on Genesis is not the way that he should have gone.
Right.
And that in the Vulcan culture, there needs to be a spiritual ceremony, a receptive kind of ritual where the person's spirit, I forgot what they called it, it's a Vulcan name.
A Katra.
Their spirit is honored and kind of lives on.
Yeah.
And so what happens is this chasm. You have the body somewhere on Genesis, as I understand that they know that the body's there.
Right.
And you have the spirit of Spock in one of his friends.
Right, presumably in Kirk, because he would have been his best friend and the last person with whom he spoke before he died. And apparently this is a thing that as they get close to death, they will mind meld with another person and put their Katra, their spirit, their soul, their essence inside of them. I'm a little confused. And again, this is where I need someone like Dr. Trek Nemechek or John Champion to clear it up for me. When Sarek comes in and says this, it's implied that this is what they all do, that as they die, they mind meld and put their spirit, their essence, their Katra into someone else. But at the end of the film, when Sarek goes to the priestess and says, this is what I want to have happen. I want you to try to put Spock's memories and being back into his body. She's like, this has not been done for eons. And even then it's just legend. So it's like, who does this and where do those spirits go?
That made sense to me because this is the first time the body is alive in hundreds of years.
Sure. But if it's regular practice for Vulcans to put their minds, their body, their souls into another person's body, where do those go eventually? Because we see that it's driving McCoy mad. Like to have two people in the body.
They climb the steps of the ancient temple on Vulcan. And that's my understanding. Like that person, the ritual involves carrying the spirit of that person up those steps and up to the top of the temple.
Yes.
What happens there is unclear to me because they don't need to do that. Spock is...
Well, they do it.
They do, right, but Spock is... His body is alive, which we also need to address.
So on the Genesis planet, basically the Genesis planet is reviving dead things, or actually nothing alive was supposed to be on there to begin with. That wasn't plant life, but microbes from the Enterprise that naturally made their way onto the torpedo tube before it was shot onto the planet. Those microbes, upon coming into contact with the life of the planet, began aging and evolving at an accelerated rate until eventually they became full-on snake-like creatures. So basically, they were proving that the planet itself was evolving faster than it should and faster than is safe. So the planet itself was only going to have an especially short lifespan. By the end of the movie, the planet is already crumbling and dying. So there's that. This presumably kickstarted Spock's cells. But interestingly, it kickstarted his cells, like similar to the microbes. It wasn't Spock's body that returned to life. It was some DNA that was there in the
so
casket.
His body decayed quickly.
I don't know.
That's my understanding because of the way that this planet generates.
Potentially, but his body wasn't in the casket, and none of the remains were. His ceremonial shroud was similar to, like, if you believe in the Shroud of Turin. There's a lot of religious overtones to this film where, if the first movie, if Khan is essentially sort of, well, any number of characters could have been like a Pontius Pilate type. And then you've got the Christ-like figure that sacrifices himself for the good of the many. And then sure enough, the Genesis planet revives him and he comes out of his tomb and, leaves behind a burial shroud. The body is nowhere to be found, but then when we find him later, he's a small boy. So it's not like the body reanimated.
No, not that's
without
right.
without the Katra of Spock.
My understanding is that you're right. Some microbiological process happened at the very, very small, tiniest level, and his DNA was present in that tiniest level, and then it just grew and grew. The cells multiplied, and he here in a moment of hours, you have a child, and that child is Spock.
Yeah.
But that child does not have the essence of Spock, the spirit of Spock, the personality of Spock. It's just sort of a blank slate.
Correct.
And so the child doesn't know language, is frightened, is physically developed, but emotionally very underdeveloped. Mm-hmm. Intellectually somewhat underdeveloped. And it's Savek who kind of has moments of taking care of him, of becoming a parental figure, until Ponfar, which is
sexy time.
It's basically, the way I understood that is like, he's going through phases of development in such a fast-paced way that it's necessary for her to like explain what's going on to him and to kind of assure him this is all normal. By the way, throughout each of these phases, he's like screaming during all the transitions.
Well, imagine going through all of your growth spurt within a matter of hours. I mean,
horrifying. And not knowing what you are. You don't have other people around you, other Vulcans around you to kind of explain until this Vulcan comes around.
Well, and once you reach the age of Ponfar, so the idea is like once a Vulcan male achieves adulthood, puberty in essence, every 7 years, their blood essentially begins to just sort of boil with the heat of, it's like a chemical imbalance in their brain. It's neurochemical. And Ponfar can be, I guess, the side effects of Ponfar. So the extreme pain can be eliminated through this mating ritual. Like you're essentially in the same way that you are sharing your mind with another being when you're doing a mind meld by doing this little finger ceremony. It's this mating ritual that's telepathic in nature, and she is literally helping calm that neurochemical imbalance. So she's essentially giving herself over to this virgin kid who is experiencing the most painful agony. Not just is all of his bones forming and growing and, creating the structure of an adult man very quickly, but he's also having to deal with puberty. Mm-hmm. And so she kneels down and gently explains to him, this is what's happening. And she offers up her hand and he begins to touch it. And the two of them have... It's essentially a mating.
Yeah, it's an
ceremony.
Intimate thing. And it looked like everyone had consent and choice, and she relieved him of all of this agony. It was a little odd for me because I thought she had more of a mentor or parent like relationship with
him. She did, but she's the only she's a Vulcan woman, and she knows that this is what this kid's going to go through, and outside of making the kid just sit there and suffer,
sure,
it becomes a stronger bond.
The other thing that was a little awkward for me was the transitions and kind of the makeups, the effects that they were using to show him transition from one age to another. And this was no Michael Jackson Thriller level of makeup. Okay. Visual effects. This was no.
So Rick Baker was not doing.
Definitely not an American Werewolf in London level.
There was one moment that was even remotely close.
That's what I'm saying. They tried to do that, but it was disgusting.
Well, most of the I like that you're saying the American Werewolf in London makeups or transition wasn't like a disgusting. I mean, that looks like a really painful transition, similar to this one, but
I'd say in a different way.
Right. Well, so the majority of the times that we saw this kid transition, the transition happened off camera.
Yeah.
Like they would just replace the child playing him, who then became a teen, and then eventually became Leonard Nimoy. But yes, there was one moment where you can see the facial features begin to, or trying to take shape, the structure of his skull becoming the Leonard Nimoy face. Again, I just felt like so much of Star Trek 3 feels cheap to me. And I think you're kind of saying the same thing.
I mean, you showed your card. Like, why all the transitions just involved casting an older kid. I don't know why you needed those few seconds of his face contorting. It just really showed that you didn't finance the makeups and visual effects enough to get the look you were going for.
Which is ironic because they were saying that the special effects, the makeup and special effects folks felt like they had more money to play with, because when you look at the movie, the set is basically the same. Mm-hmm. It's already been built, ready to go. The uniforms are all basically the same. I mean, they gave them new street clothes, but they felt like so much of the film had been designed already, because it's a direct sequel to the second movie, that we could spend a little bit more money on these things, on the visual effects and all of that, and it's fine. It's fine. To go forward in the story, though, we learn that Spock's body, his aging and growing, is directly connected to the Genesis planet. And so he is aging as quickly as the planet is, which is a bad sign, because eventually the planet is going to die quickly, and presumably so will Spock. Interestingly, though, Spock, Vulcans live hundreds of years. So he is basically aging hundreds of years within a matter of days, physically. We're reintroduced to Klingons, led by Krug, played by Christopher Lloyd, and his dog. What's funny is, for as little as I like this movie, I did have the action figures, and I remember I had Spock, I had Kirk, I don't remember if I had McCoy, I had Scotty, I had Krug, and Krug came with that dog. Like, it was a gray rubber, ugly,
weird
dog beast.
And that dog did not survive, and that upset me.
Did it? Every time you saw it, you were like, ugh, ugh. And then it died, and you're like, whoa.
I don't like when animals don't survive in the movies they're in. Even this like fictional space animal.
Yeah.
So tell me about, I did want to ask you this, the Klingon. As I understand it, they have looked different. So I know Klingons from Next Gen.
Yeah.
I understand that they look very different in this movie and in the first movie.
Well, the first movie and this movie are like direct predecessors to Next Gen. They're kind of the same. They've got the pointy foreheads and all that stuff. Who they really look different to is the Klingons in Star Trek VI, who are just men, like just humanoid men in brown face. With
in Star Trek VI, like the movie?
66.
Oh, 66.
66, the original series. So in the original series, they just look like normal human beings in brown face.
I'm actually
with
Googling.
Facial hair.
I'm Googling this right now because I don't think I've ever seen Klingon from 66.
Okay, so tell me what you think when you look up the Klingons from 66.
Well, okay. I don't know what to tell you. Kind of offensive.
Mm-hmm. Because they are, because they're clearly a white guy in brown face. And by the way,
not all of them,
all
but
the Klingons,
most of them.
All the Klingons in this movie are white guys in brown face as well.
And I see what you're saying, that these Klingons look more like Next Gen. I just think that they finally, like Next Gen, the makeup effects are much better on a TV show than on this film.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Michael Westmore did the makeup effects for the series. Did he do Star Trek 3? Let's see. We're now like looking stuff up here. I don't know if Michael Westmore did the makeup effects for Star Trek 3, but I mean, I could see it going either way. I don't mind the makeup effects from this one, especially if you're talking about a version of the Klingons that hadn't really been perfected at this point. This is basically where the Klingon language came from, this film.
Okay.
In fact,
which is a real language.
Yeah. So it was actually developed by a linguist. There's a full dictionary. There are books to this day being translated in Klingon. There's already been Shakespeare, for example. The complete works of Shakespeare have been done in Klingon. You can take a college course. Some colleges that are Klingon, it's the Klingon language. And that's basically where that language got started, was here in this film. If I remember correctly, the cover to the first Klingon dictionary was a shot from this film. Okay, so what was your question? So your question was really just about the makeup effects?
No. Actually, it was a little bit more around who they are. I understand from this film and the first film that they are not allies.
So they are what would be considered the Russian counterparts to these two Starfleet's Americans.
Okay.
They are a warrior group of people who are hell-bent on dying with honor, and yet not all of their actions are necessarily honor-based. Cloaking your bird of prey, for example, taking aim at a ship and then decloaking just in time to like shoot them, would be an example of where I don't necessarily see the honor. But it's very important for them to die with honor.
Sure.
And to die a warrior's
Well,
death.
I was going to say the warrior culture is greatly important to them.
Yes.
And it seems like the concepts of control and domination are a part, at least for their military folks. Like this seems like what they're all about.
Correct. And Starfleet and the Federation outnumber the Klingons considerably. They are great adversaries, but I wouldn't say that financially or socioeconomically, they don't really stand a chance against the Federation. That doesn't stop them from trying. Mm-hmm. And as they're creating these peace treaties and signing all this, all these treaties to end any conflicts between the two races. And Krug even mentions this. He says, like, even now as our people are creating treaties with the Federation is off behind our backs creating this weapon, the Genesis device. And if you think of it this way, think of in the third film, think of Genesis as nuclear weapons.
Oh, I did.
And it's the race between the Russians and the Americans having nuclear technology, and the Russians have decided they are going to take that technology from the Americans, i.e. Starfleet.
Right. Well, when Admiral Kirk told Cruise, you're in violation, you must stand down, Cruise was like, look, the Federation has been creating this massive weapon and hiding it and keeping it secret and not letting us know that they're creating this weapon. You're in violation. Like, you need to listen to me. Like, it seemed, I definitely wouldn't call that reasonable, but I would say like the grievance is very, has some sense to it. Mm-hmm. For me, this villain, there were some moments where I wondered if this was I don't know if this character existed in 66, but no. I got the sense that they were trying to kind of have a Khan-like formidable opponent to Admiral Kirk with some changes to it, but I just felt like it was a little bit of a do-over. Like, why are you trying this again?
Right.
When it was so well done in the second movie, it just seemed like a repeat of some of those beats.
Yeah.
I wasn't really fascinated by this villain. I didn't really care about their motivations. It simply seemed to be they learned of this weapon of mass destruction. They want their hands on it. They're going to essentially try to squeeze it out of Kirk.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that they were looking for a way to mirror Khan, because in this particular case, I saw Krug more as a more warrior-like mirror to Kirk. Even going down to the fact that there's the one character, I cannot remember his name now to save my life, but there's the one bridge crew member of the Bird of Prey that seems like the Spock character, the one who, when he sees the data tapes for Genesis, actually has the same reaction that Spock does, which is, oh, this is fascinating. You can do this with this. You can, and then when they start to think about the ramifications of that, this thoughtful character is sort of, I just couldn't help but to think, oh, they're creating Klingon counterparts to the Enterprise bridge crew. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree that he's not a strong character. He tries. He is the catalyst for a huge arc for Kirk going forward in the next couple of movies. And that is in the death of David, Kirk's son, that he really just got to know. Krug sends members of his crew down to the Genesis planet. They wrangle Saavik, Spock, and David together. Krug orders one of them to be killed. Clearly, the Klingon is going to kill Saavik in that moment. And David gets in front of it and starts to fight the guy, gets stabbed, and is killed there on the spot.
An honorable death.
An honorable death.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Talk about like ways in which the Klingons are not honorable. He was going to stab her in the back. Like he went around behind them and was going to kill them from behind, which I wouldn't call honorable in any way. But
well, they don't want other people who are not Klingons to have honorable deaths.
Right. I just don't think his killing them in their back is an honorable way to win the battle either. But this directly leads to, I think, one of the best moments in this film, and that's Kirk's reaction to the death of his boy. He backs up, stumbles, nearly sits down in his chair, but misses and actually hits the floor right in front of the chair instead. Don't know off the top of my head if that was a mistake or if that's as directed. I've got to think it's as directed. The camera follows him pretty well. I think that's a great moment. What did you think of David's death and how that affects Kirk, now having lost his best friend and now his own son in trying to retrieve his best friend from this planet? What are your thoughts on that?
Let's listen to the clip.
Okay, I have a clip.
Admiral, David is dead.
Klingon bastard, you killed my son. Oh. Klingon bastard, you've killed my son. You Klingon bastard.
I thought that was very realistic, almost, completely reactionary. He's actually trying to use a lot of logic and intellect that's what he did with Khan, right? He's trying to negotiate, get more time, some of the tactics he's used before. Klingons, as I'm learning, ain't playing.
Yeah.
Like,
not giving it.
This person isn't going to try, like Cruz is not going to say, I'm going to kill one of your men and wait. He's just going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's very vicious. And I think that savagery is hitting I know Admiral Kirk knows about Klingons, but I think that really hits him personally.
And what's interesting is the fact that he says, kill one of them. I don't care which. Like, just do it.
And
whichever one, doesn't matter to me.
And Cruz doesn't know that one of those humans, the human amongst the Vulcans is
Kirk's son.
Is his son. So he doesn't really know the massive impact of this.
And then doesn't really care when he finds out.
He doesn't care. So Kirk has not resolved the grief from the loss of his colleague and best friend Spock, because we're still within, the weeks of experiencing the sudden death of Spock. And I had been thinking about this because, again, I was thinking that Kirk was showing this portrayal of grief and loss in such a heartbreaking but realistic way. He was sort of walking around the bridge in the beginning of the movie saying that things felt empty. No, they felt more than empty. Like, this is a deeper thing than just it being empty. It was, it's almost as if something was taken away, and something was taken away from him. So there's a compounding effect here. And while I was sad about this, I wasn't a huge fan of David, but I was incredibly sad about this moment and saw that here's somebody trying to be a leader and be incredibly resilient after a personal loss, and has the next worst thing happen to him. And when we see in our lives the compounding impact of multiple losses, and not only losses that that might be expected or might be just a part of life, but very unexpected, catastrophic losses like this.
Yeah.
My worry for him is, okay, he could go into a traumatic grief experience. So where grief is, again, a normal part, unfortunately, of our experiences, traumatic grief is when the loss happens suddenly, unexpectedly, sometimes in a very horrific, devastating way. Losing someone in an accident, losing someone to a murder, losing someone to an illness. We talked about this happening in WandaVision. So that character, Wanda, Scarlet Witch, she had a huge reaction to her traumatic grief, right? So that's how that looks different. And so my worry for him is, up until this point, his grief seemed what I would call typical, in the sense of, thinking about that person, noticing their absence, noticing other people's reactions. Like, these are all kind of par for the course. And then this devastation made me really worry for him.
Yeah.
Because traumatic grief has a very different trajectory. It doesn't have that kind of natural recovery period. You're going to see more symptoms of kind of post-traumatic stress symptoms. You're going to see some very reactive emotions and behaviors. You start to hear language that's considered counterfactual thinking, well, what if I had, Kirk may be thinking, well, what if I had done this differently, or imagining how things would have been different. That's counterfactual thinking. And so having that kind of shock, disbelief, and horror evolve into a fixation about the tragedy, turning inward. I should have done this. I should have done that. The prolonged nightmares, the possible intrusive thoughts about this, all of those things concern me for him, because now he's a candidate for this. And if we were to say, is there a diagnosis for this? In the last couple of years, the diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder had been approved for the DSM revision. So prolonged grief disorder would be what I would be really concerned about for him.
Now I'm interested to see what you think as the films go on.
Yeah, and this film doesn't end the way this film progresses and ends. Doesn't give me enough information to say Kirk has prolonged grief disorder.
But he does instantly get super angry. I mean, obviously at this moment, the ship is dead in space. They've both injured each other enough that neither ship is particularly doing well at the moment. And so he decides, in a incredibly painful decision, that he's going to blow the Enterprise up. And he's going to take a number of the Klingons with it. He's essentially going to, I don't know if murder is the right word, but these Klingons believe they've won. They believe they're beaming onto the Enterprise to take over. And when they do, no one is there. There's just the ship computer counting down from 8 at this point.
Well, and I understand, I'm thinking about this strategy. You have nowhere else to go. You have Genesis, which is crumbling and going through all these climate disasters. It's about to basically explode. You have the Enterprise, which conveniently has no one on it except this crew, because they stole it from the dock station. And then you have the Bird of Prey, which is battle damaged. The strategy is
currently no one's on it to you can't take over the Bird of Prey.
So basically the strategy is get the majority of Cruz's crew onto the end, beam them onto the Enterprise. Sorry, I had that in the wrong order. Beam our small crew off the Enterprise.
Yes.
Beam the Klingons onto the Enterprise. Blow up the Enterprise. You've sort of resolved that. End up on Genesis, but that's going to blow up in a few hours.
Yeah, but
so it's very risky.
At this point, while I do think he was doing everything he could to recover Spock, because Spock is the only other character on this planet with him besides Krug. He's going at Krug with like reckless abandon. We could both die here and I would almost be okay with it. Like I got a sense of
like a nothing to lose attitude.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think just because Spock was the only person left on that planet and was still a boy in that moment, I think that's probably what brought Kirk back from the brink. Notice too, even with all of his hatred of this particular Klingon at this moment, when Krug goes over the cliff toward the lava, the magma pit, and Kirk reaches down to help him. And he's like, take my hand. And instead, Krug takes his boot and tries to drag him down into the lava with him, believing that even if he dies, at least by killing my nemesis, I will have died an honorable death. And Kirk just kicks him in the face. He's like, I have had enough of you.
Well, and that to me was a little unlike, for me to say what's like him or unlike him, I don't have the pleasure that you have of the series from the 60s to like fill their persona. But my understanding is that when he says he's had enough, emotionally, there is no space for understanding. There's no space for negotiation. There's no space for even any level of compassion toward this person because of the devastation and because that blame has to go somewhere. I felt that was a very like typical reaction. Whether they have prolonged grief disorder or not, that seemed to be a reason. The idea of this seems to be a reasonable thing.
Yeah.
What I was surprised at was how quickly, I didn't know, I thought the villain would be around for a bit. This villain is out. He gets kicked in the face. He lands in the
doesn't
lava.
have a whole lot to do in this film.
No.
I also am unclear on how they even got the data tapes for Genesis to begin with, but that might be a different.
You wonder about those tapes. I wonder about the tapes showing all the different scenes of Spock's death as if there are all these different cameras
getting all these great close-ups and medium close-ups and
that
wide shots.
That bothered me so much.
Yeah, it's just a cheap television film tactic. Again, like I was saying before, 4 different times we bring up that. And the final time is there after this ceremony is done and McCoy is okay. McCoy goes against type in this moment because Talar, who is a priestess, gives McCoy the option of declining to go through with the ceremony because there's going to be as much danger involved to him as there is to Spock. And what she's trying to do is essentially go through, and at least what I think she's trying to do is she's kind of mind melding with both of them. She is a conduit, and she is literally pulling everything of Spock out of one brain and putting it into the other, and not trying to take any of McCoy with it and not trying to do any damage to McCoy.
It's an excision that has risks because you don't know exactly how much of McCoy you might pull out or damage.
Correct. Or how much of the two of them they may not survive. McCoy gets up and is like, I'm okay, Jim. No problem. But what I appreciate is that McCoy goes against Ty because she gives him the ability or the decision. And he says, I'll take the danger. And everyone kind of looks at him like, that's not you. Like, you're not that guy. And he's like, hell of a time to ask,
Maybe it's only logical. Maybe there's something, because throughout the film, the majority of the film shows McCoy as a kind of I usually don't say this, but like multiple personalities, like having aspects of Spock, aspects of McCoy, one emotional, the other scientific, and
he comes right out and talks to Kirk as Spock through McCoy's body the first time that they.
I mean, the heartfelt part of this is that the crew, the main crew, the circle of friends, the fellowship, they are all getting their deceased friend's spirit to heaven. I mean, that's kind of what we're meant to understand. And that's kind of the first agreement among them. Then we realize we've got to get the essence, the spirit of Spock back
into his now live body.
Into his body.
Yeah.
And that's something that they make an agreement on, and it works. And I think that part is delightful. It's successful. Spock is coming to. He's actualizing. He starts to remember who Kirk is.
He doesn't remember them at first. Walks right past them. Has no recollection of them whatsoever. But then, as he starts climbing a couple of stairs, as they're exiting, he turns back, looks at Kirk and the other members of the bridge crew, and walks over to Kirk and says, my father tells me that you and I are friends, that you're an important person to me. Which means a lot that Sarek would say, because Sarek doesn't necessarily agree with Spock's being in Starfleet to begin with and all of that. So it's nice of him to acknowledge Kirk and says, that my father tells me that you and I are friends and that you came back for me. And then in a moment of like searching for the logic is like, why would you do that? Like, why would you risk your life? Why would you know what? As I look down at my laptop, I realize I have the clip for this. Okay. So let me play this because I think this is important. Here we go.
My father says that you have been my friend. You came back for me.
You would have done the same for me.
Why would you do this?
Because the needs of the one outweighed the needs of the many.
Okay, Drea, having now heard that again, it contradicts the second movie. It contradicts Spock's sacrifice. But also what Kirk is saying is that friendship means so much and family means so much that we are willing to sacrifice our careers. We're willing to sacrifice, I don't know if we're willing to sacrifice, but we understand the risks that one or more of us might die, or our family members, David, for example, dies. Their ship is destroyed. This was their home. It's the only place that Kirk truly feels like himself. And it was all for this one person. And
who may not be the same person when they're reintegrated.
Yeah.
And may not even love them or care about them back.
Yeah.
Which is a huge risk. I think that it is telling, and it uplifts the concept that a handful of people have written me about, which is that like love and logic, emotion and rationality, like these things aren't orthogonal. They aren't necessarily on separate planes or on two sides of it of different concepts. That sometimes something very loving can make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it's even difficult to articulate that. But for Admiral Kirk, this was all, if anything, this was purely logical. Like, my experience of my love for you has motivated me to take these actions. I'm behaving in a way that just kind of follows the way that I feel. And that has sort of an innate explanation to it. And I felt that in this film, like not quite as much as I felt it in the first movie, where there was much less like dialogue about these sort of things.
Yeah.
And the way they show it was like, show me, don't tell me. Like they really showed us to the point where I had to get clarification.
Yeah.
Like what's going on. But I did appreciate that that's what this movie is about. So many big things happen. The Enterprise explodes. the son dies.
So hold on. So right before that, there's the moment with Sarek where Sarek lists out all the things that happened right there with Kirk. I've got that too because I think it's important. Let's take a listen.
Kirk, I thank you. What you have done is...
What I have done, I had to do.
But at what cost? Your ship, your son.
If I hadn't tried, the cost would have been my soul.
And I understand that in two ways.
Okay.
When he says, I would have lost my soul, I understood that as his friend, I understood that I am a steward of his spirit going on into the next phase.
Yeah.
No matter if I don't understand it, no matter if it doesn't make sense to me, that is what would have made sense to him. Yeah,
because he tells Admiral Morrow, even in the beginning, when he's like, let us go do this because of this religion. And Morrow's like, we don't even, why would we go do it for all this mysticism and, hocus pocus religion? And he's like, well, but if it is true, wouldn't it really be awful of us to leave his body back on Genesis? Yeah. It's the understanding that look, I don't have to believe in what they believe. I just have to respect what they believe, and I have to try to help my friend if he is in fact in suffering.
And the second thing that I thought about with this is that he had not yet overcome his grief, that he was still in sorrow, sort of in this experience of not quite yet understanding life without Spock.
Yeah.
And that maybe he felt as though things would have stayed unresolved or things would have stayed lacking this closure, that he wasn't sure that he would ever pull himself out of this grief, if not to be in service to his friend in this way.
Yeah.
So it means many things. I mean, the third thing that I'm reminded of, I'm just going to make lists, is going back to what we were talking about, that it has a sensibility about it. It has some logic to it that comes out in this big statement.
Yeah.
And that's another virtue. That's another way to kind of honor Spock, is this would have stayed unresolved. I would have been lost adrift, not myself, because I still have not yet fulfilled this important impasse, this important transition, this honor for my friend. And that to him takes up his brain. It makes so much sense. I don't have a way to describe it other than that.
Yeah.
It sort of fills him. That is the void. And there's lots of stuff in the beginning of this movie about emptiness, void, about Spock being this young kid coming out of that tube, being a void, not having the essence of his spirit there. And this idea that the search for Spock, I mean, we can interpret that all we want, but my understanding is that it wasn't for the body of Spock. It was like the search for his, like, the essence, the spirit, how we commemorate and honor him after his death.
Yeah.
That resolves our grief in a way that can help us move on.
Yeah.
And I think what's weird for me about this film is that, I mean, not for nothing, but he does come back. And so he's back on the crew.
Well, he's not back on a crew yet. I don't know
how
we
this
should say,
ends.
we should say that Sarek makes it clear this is going to take time. And he walks off, like, he basically is starting to walk off with all the other Vulcans when he then comes back to that group. And then there's the big, basically the group hug moment as we then crane out and go to our closing credits. But there is the indication that Spock might not be Spock for a while. And if nothing else, it excites me that much more, the thought of us talking about Star Trek 4, particularly the beginning. Because like I said, 2, 3, and 4 are all direct sequels to one another.
Okay.
Just like George Takei said in that story, you can't leave your crew on Vulcan. So we got to figure out a way to get them off the planet. And that's where we come to Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's a direct sequel. And I look forward to seeing what you thought of that when we get to watch it. Yeah, this is still, even as I watched it last night, this still might be my least favorite of the 6 films.
I haven't seen all of them, but I started to fall asleep toward the end. I hate to say that.
I don't necessarily blame you.
And like I said, I'm a big fan of Spock now, and Spock, as we know him, was barely in this movie. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't much for me to connect to. We
should say Spock, as we know him, wasn't even in this movie, because even at the end, he's not Spock.
Right.
Spock. So, yeah.
Any information about Leonard Nimoy experiencing this new role, directing a film like that, was because he dabbled in a bunch of other things, photography, writing,
and he directed. I mean,
this wasn't his first.
Well, this may have been his first movie, but he's been a successful director. Like Leonard Nimoy made 3 Men and a Baby.
What?
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy directed 3 Men and a Baby. You didn't know that?
No.
Yes. Leonard Nimoy made movies beyond the 2 Star Trek movies.
I love that movie.
Yeah. Well.
Wow. I was in my mind.
You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah.
No. I will say, let me just say quickly one more thing. Because I'm hearing the fireworks and I know we got to wrap this one up.
Right.
When Spock's father, Sarek, is seeking some answers and goes toward, goes to visit Admiral Kirk, convinced that Spock's spirit is in him, mm-hmm. and then realizes maybe he knows more. Maybe there's something in my understanding is he does a mind meld to discover if there's something else in him.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up because I meant to talk about this. Yeah, go ahead.
So he does a mind meld to see if there's something not in Kirk's consciousness that can reveal mm-hmm. where Spock's spirit lives, resides.
Or really what he's convinced that Spock would have done it with Kirk. And so he's going into the mind to find Spock's Katra, only to realize it's not there. This isn't where he put it.
Got it. Okay. So he mind melds, and unfortunately, all of us experience Spock's death again.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask you about, because as you were saying, Kirk was still going through grieving, but I have to imagine that the role of the captain of a starship, an admiral in Starfleet, can't just go around the ship crying. He's got to keep a stoic face at some point, knowing that his first officer and best friend has just been taken from him. And it's not until the moment with Sarek that we see him start to lose it. I mean, obviously we did during the death itself.
And this is more emotionally pronounced and profound than a flashback.
Yeah.
So a flashback is a very vivid, realistic remembering.
Yeah, in this case, they're
of a tragedy or horrific thing.
Yeah.
He is, the mind meld, as I understand it, is it's like rewinding a tape. Like you are really going through that experience again. You're seeing, hearing, touching, experiencing everything again. And I worried so much for Kirk because, as I said, as he was pacing the bridge before this, mentioning the emptiness, that seemed like a very adaptive way, to remember Spock. Going through it again, in some ways, could be a good thing. especially if he had not processed it or not had enough moments in his own intimate ways, in his own personal ways with the memories to really process what happened.
Yeah.
So it could be a good thing for him.
This is also kind of like, and I don't want to get too, I don't want to give it too much credibility, especially since this is a fictional universe in which mind melds exist, but it was almost like hypnotherapy, where it's like, let me take you back to the moment. What are you feeling in this moment? Even to the point that Kirk's last statement was, after, because Sarek is saying all of Spock's lines and Kirk is responding the way that he did in the moment, the last thing he says is no. In the same way that he does in the film.
Well, I mean, you don't need hypnotherapy because it's a lot of grief therapy. Again, if we realize someone has been avoiding the incident or has not processed what actually occurred, you might, in a very gradual, supportive way, bring up that memory and have the person process the experiences, the emotions, the parts of that they can recall to have some level of integration of that memory in with all their other memories of that person. So again, and it should be stated that Sarek isn't his therapist, so that's not the purpose of this. But I did wonder, might that actually help him? I worried less than I wondered. My worry wasn't, oh no, now he's going through the trauma again. And that, not at all. I more so wondered like, this might be helpful for him because there could be a chance that he hasn't processed the deeper level of loss around this tragic event. And here's an opportunity to do that.
Right.
And to do that safely with someone who trusts him and who he trusts. So it's not the reminder of this incident is not done in another traumatic way.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that scene.
Yeah. I want to go to a question from Twitter at Big Mikey Waz. Says, during your discussion of the second movie, you referred to the scene with Spock and the radiation as his Kobayashi Maru. I wish I could say that we're taking credit for that, but Spock comes right out and says, I never took the Kobayashi Maru test until now. What do you think of my solution?
Yeah.
When he's talking to Kirk. Now, one could argue that decision to go down there and do all of that is his Kobayashi Maru. He is now succeeded in the test of the no-win scenario. He has saved his ship and his crew and his friends, but he is going to die in the process. However, Big Mikey Waz says, do you think his interaction with McCoy, i.e. the mind meld, and remember, and what came of that was his Kirk moment for beating the Kobayashi Maru?
I don't think intentionally, but
especially if
okay, so my understanding is Spock did the mind meld because he wanted somebody to lay him to rest properly.
Or that's the confusing thing about this movie is we don't know really what they wanted, but when he confronts Kirk through McCoy in his quarters on the Enterprise, he says, why did you leave me there? Why did you not have my body? It might not be too late. Take me up to this ceremonial place on Vulcan and let's get this done. Like, it's almost as if Spock is saying, I'm not dead yet. My body, and even Sarek says, only the vessel is gone. His spirit is here. So it's almost like Kirk or Spock was like, I'm going to go die. But I'm not really going to die. I'm going to pull a Kirk and cheat death by putting my essence into someone else before I sacrifice my body.
I don't know. The way that I see it, even after seeing the third film is, and especially after seeing the third film is, I'm going to die an untimely death. My body is going to be ravaged by this radiation.
Yeah.
My spirit will be in limbo. Take care of me.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. Take my spirit to its final resting place. I don't know Spock to be like Kirk in the manner of, how can I win this? I don't know that that's important to him, but it's left up to interpretation, and a fantastic question by this person.
Big Mikey Waz, I think you have won yourself an enamel pin from the Arkham sessions.
Yay!
Yay!
We've gotten a few messages, some DMs, a few voice messages. By the way, keep those coming. Go to speakpipe.com/Arkham sessions or my website, drdreapsychology.com. Hit that orange button, record for 2 minutes. Send us your questions, your comments, your inquiries, your challenges. I'm new to Star Trek-ish, so I'm sure there are things that I got wrong or, maybe want to learn more about. So please keep those messages coming.
I'm not new to Star Trek, and I'm still sure I've got some stuff wrong. But we should say that if you have sent us these messages already and we've not read them or played them, it's because we're actually thinking of putting them into different episodes specific to conversations that we might want to have later. So don't let us make you think that we didn't appreciate your message. We just haven't played it yet because we're not ready to talk about it. That being said, we do have some folks to thank, especially our patrons, for making this episode and all of our episodes possible. Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, Candy B, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Hero's Journey Fitness, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, Swara Salih, Trevor Andres, my father Carl Ward, Michael Pruitt, Rachel Acevedo Huffman, Eric O'Sullivan, Zach Neal, Ruben Gonzalez, and Dr. Girlfriend. Go check out our Patreon to get your name called out in the next episode. Also, we should say that we've got a couple things going up on Patreon right now. I bid a certain amount of money on a matte painting from Batman Returns. It was a 4-foot by 5-foot matte painting on glass used in the movie Batman Returns, and it was of the Batcave. How much do you think I bid on it, and did I win it? Go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions to find out. Also, we are running a poll for the next week. Do you want us to do a live episode similar to the one we did with Batman Forever, talking about Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home? We're giving you the opportunity to let us know. Again, that would be done on Discord, and you can watch the movie along with us and then stay afterward for a live recording of the podcast. It was a lot of fun last time. I know, Drea, you're looking forward to another opportunity, and we thought we would give our patrons an opportunity to decide. So far, you know what? I'm not even going to tell you what the vote is so far, but I highly recommend people go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. Join the $3 tier and cast your vote. You've got until next week.
Oh, hey, Comic-Con.
Yeah, we should talk about Comic-Con.
We will be at Comic-Con July 18th through the 23rd. Duration.
Yeah.
And we cannot yet reveal the details of our panel, but it's related to what we've been talking about over the past
few weeks,
couple months. So come hang out at Comic-Con.
Yeah. Especially you'll want to be there on Saturday. That's all I'm going to say about that until we're allowed to announce, which I imagine will be any day now. But keep an eye out on our Twitter, on our Facebook, Patreon, and Discord, etc. We will definitely let you know all the details. You're not going to want to miss it. Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can find those details when we post them?
I'll be on Blue Sky.
What?
My account is Dr. Drea, DREA.
Wait, you asked me if I joined Blue Sky. Is that what this is? It's a new social media thing?
You got to have an invitation, though.
Don't need it.
I'll send you one.
Don't want one.
Otherwise, I am on my website, drdreapsychology.com. As I said, you can leave emails there. You can leave a voice message for us. You can listen to our podcast, read some articles, and I hope to hear from you.
Yep. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at bward028. You can find me on Facebook. No, you can't. You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions and on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. And then you should follow our family over at Fanpace Press to get all their latest podcasts and comics and news. You're going to love them as we do. Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Your work today has been outstanding. I intend to recommend you all for promotion in whatever fleet we end up serving.